You've been lied to about the Battle of Thermopylae, everything you think you know about 300 Spartans holding off 1,000,000 Persians. Yeah, most of it's wrong. And the real story is way more interesting than the movie version. So here's what actually happened at Thermopylae in 480 BC, and trust me, the truth is going to surprise you. Because while Hollywood wants you to believe it was just 300 buff guys in capes and speedos fighting for freedom, the reality involves a lot more soldiers, some really bad decisions, and a twist ending that nobody talks about. Let me start by saying this. The Battle of Thermopylae did happen. King Leonidas was real, the Spartans were there, and yes, most of them died. But the details, that's where things get messy. And we need to clear this up because this battle has been used as propaganda for literally thousands of years. Everyone from ancient Greeks to modern movies has twisted this story to fit whatever message they wanted to push. So let's break down what's myth and what's real. First things first, there weren't just 300 soldiers at Thermopylae. This is probably the biggest lie that keeps getting repeated. Yes, Leonidas brought 300 Spartan soldiers with him. These were his personal bodyguard, the royal guard, all full Spartan citizens. But they weren't alone. Not even close. Ancient sources tell us there were somewhere between 4,000 to 7,000 Greek soldiers total at Thermopylae. We're talking about troops from different Greek city-states. There were Thespians, Thebans, Phocians, Locrians, and soldiers from other places too. So why does everyone forget about them? Because Sparta had better PR, basically. They controlled the narrative afterwards and made sure everyone remembered their sacrifice while kind of brushing aside everyone else who died there. Now let's talk about why they were even there in the first place. In 480 BC, the Persian Empire under King Xerxes decided they wanted to conquer Greece. Again. They'd tried before and failed, but this time they were coming with everything they had. Ancient historians like Herodotus claimed Xerxes brought over 1,000,000 soldiers. Modern historians think that number is crazy exaggerated, and it was probably more like 100,000 to 300,000 troops. Still a massive army, though. The Greeks knew they were coming, and they needed to stop them somewhere. Thermopylae was perfect for a defensive stand. It's this narrow coastal pass between the mountains and the sea. At its narrowest point, it was only about 50 feet wide back then, so it didn't matter if the Persians had 100,000 soldiers or 1,000,000. They could only attack with a few dozen guys at a time. The terrain turned the Persian numbers advantage into basically nothing. This is why the Greeks chose to make their stand there. It was smart strategy. But here's where the story gets interesting. The Greeks weren't planning a suicide mission. That's another myth. They were there to hold the pass long enough for the main Greek army to get organized. This was supposed to be a delaying action, not a last stand. Leonidas and his men were buying time. The plan was to hold Thermopylae while the Greek navy fought the Persian fleet at Artemisium nearby. If both positions held, the Persians would be stuck and eventually have to retreat because they couldn't supply such a huge army indefinitely. So what went wrong? Why did it turn into a massacre? One word, betrayal. There was this local Greek guy named Ephialtes. He knew the area really well because he lived there. And he did something that's pretty much guaranteed to get your name remembered in the worst way possible. He went to Xerxes and told him about a mountain path that went around the Greek position at Thermopylae. This path, called the Anopaia path, was exactly what the Persians needed. They could send troops up and over the mountain and come down behind the Greek lines. The Greeks would be surrounded and cut off. Now Leonidas wasn't stupid. He knew about this path. That's why he'd stationed 1,000 Phocian soldiers up there to guard it. But when the Persians came climbing up in the middle of the night, the Phocians basically panicked. They heard the Persians coming, realized they were badly outnumbered, and retreated to a nearby hill to defend themselves. They didn't send a warning down to Leonidas. They just left the path open. This is one of those moments in history where everything falls apart because of one small failure. If those Phocians had held their ground, or at least sent a messenger, the whole battle might have ended differently. When Leonidas found out that the Persians were coming around behind him, he had to make a choice. And this is where we get to the part that actually is heroic, but not in the way the movies show it. Leonidas could have ordered everyone to retreat immediately. They might have gotten away, though it would have been close. Instead, he dismissed most of his army. He told them to leave, to get out while they still could. Most of them did. They went back to their cities to help defend Greece another day. But Leonidas stayed. And here's the thing. He didn't stay just because he was brave or because Spartans never retreat. He stayed for a really specific reason that ancient sources mention but modern retellings usually ignore. There was a prophecy. The oracle at Delphi, which was this religious site where Greeks went to get predictions about the future, had told the Spartans that either Sparta would fall or a Spartan king would die. Leonidas believed this prophecy. He thought that if he died at Thermopylae, he could save Sparta itself. So his decision to stay wasn't about glory or pride. It was about religion and duty and trying to fulfill what he thought the gods wanted. The 300 Spartans stayed with him. They had to. In Spartan culture, you didn't abandon your king ever, but they weren't the only ones who stayed. This is important. 700 Thespians also refused to leave. These guys don't get nearly enough credit. They weren't Spartans, they didn't have the same warrior culture or training, but they chose to stay and fight to the death alongside Leonidas anyway. There were also 400 Thebans who stayed, though ancient sources argue about whether they stayed voluntarily or were kept there as hostages, because Thebes was kind of playing both sides. So on the final day of battle, there were roughly 1,400 Greeks making their last stand, not 300, 1,400, and they knew exactly what was about to happen to them. The Persians attacked from both sides. The main Persian force pushed through the pass from the front, while the troops that had gone around the mountain came down from behind. The Greeks were surrounded. Ancient accounts say they fought with incredible courage. When their spears broke, they fought with swords. When their swords broke, they fought with knives and their bare hands. Herodotus describes them dragging wounded soldiers back and forth across the battlefield, trying to protect each other even as they were being overwhelmed. Leonidas died in the fighting. The Spartans and Thespians fought over his body, trying to keep the Persians from taking it as a trophy. They succeeded 4 times in pushing the Persians back and recovering his body. Eventually, the Persians just killed everyone who was left standing. According to the ancient sources, 2 Spartan soldiers weren't there for the final battle. One had been sent away as a messenger. Another had an eye infection so bad he couldn't fight and was being treated in a nearby town. When he heard about the last stand, he forced his slave to lead him back to the battlefield so he could die with his brothers. The other guy, who'd been sent as a messenger, he went back to Sparta and spent the rest of his life being shamed as a coward. Spartans didn't mess around. After the battle was over and all the Greeks were dead, Xerxes did something pretty messed up. He had Leonidas's body found, beheaded, and put his head on a stake. This was actually a big deal, because Greeks and Persians both had customs about treating dead enemies with respect. Xerxes was so angry about how much trouble this small Greek force had caused him that he violated those customs. That tells you something about how frustrating this battle was for the Persians, even though they won. So how many Persians actually died at Thermopylae? Ancient sources say 20,000. Modern historians think that's probably exaggerated too, but it was definitely thousands. For 3 days, a force of a few thousand Greeks held off an army that was dozens of times larger. They killed thousands of Persian soldiers and delayed the invasion long enough for the rest of Greece to prepare. In that sense, even though they lost the battle, they helped win the war. Because here's what happened next. The Persians did push through Thermopylae. They marched into central Greece, they even captured Athens and burned it to the ground. But the Greek navy won a huge victory at Salamis a few weeks later. The Persian fleet was destroyed, and the next year the Greek army, led by Sparta, defeated the Persian land forces at Plataea. The invasion failed, Greece stayed independent, and Thermopylae became the symbol of Greek resistance. But did the Spartans really fight to the death? Yes and no. Most of the Greek army at Thermopylae retreated when Leonidas told them to. They lived to fight another day. The Spartans and Thespians and some Thebans stayed and died. But the decision to stay wasn't about being fearless warriors who knew no retreat. It was way more complicated than that. It was about religion, politics, strategy, and probably some pride mixed in there too. The myth version of Thermopylae, the one with 300 Spartans, standing alone against impossible odds, that version was created pretty much immediately after the battle. The Spartans used it as propaganda. They built monuments. They wrote poems. They turned Thermopylae into proof that Spartan warriors were superior to everyone else. Later, other people used the same story for their own purposes. The Nazis compared themselves to the Spartans at Thermopylae, which is disgusting but shows how powerful the myth became. Modern movies use it as a story about freedom versus tyranny, which is kind of ironic, because Sparta was not a free society at all. They had slaves called helots, who outnumbered actual Spartans by a huge margin, and were treated brutally. The real story of Thermopylae is less simple than the myth, but it's not less impressive. A coalition of Greek city-states worked together to defend their homes. They used smart strategy to neutralize a much larger army. When things went wrong because of betrayal and bad luck, some of them chose to sacrifice themselves to buy more time for others to escape. That's genuinely heroic. But it's not the story of superhuman warriors who were better than everyone else. It's a story about regular people, well, regular soldiers anyway, doing extraordinary things in terrible circumstances. One detail that really shows how complex this was. After the battle, the Greeks who'd retreated had a big argument about who should get credit for fighting the bravest. Different city-states claimed their soldiers had fought harder than the others. It got so heated that they eventually decided nobody would get an individual prize because they couldn't agree. But everyone agreed the Spartans deserved the most credit overall. Even that was political, though. Sparta was the most powerful military state in Greece, and everyone knew it was smart to let them have the glory. The battlefield at Thermopylae today looks completely different from how it did in 480 BC. The coastline has changed. The narrow pass that was only 50 feet wide, it's now about 3 miles from the ocean because of how sediment built up over thousands of years. There's a modern statue of Leonidas there now, big and bronze, looking heroic. Carved into the base is the famous epitaph written by the poet Simonides. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. That's beautiful and tragic, but remember, when you read that, it's describing only the Spartans. The Thespians who died there don't even get mentioned. So what's the final answer? Did the Spartans really fight to the death at Thermopylae? Yes, they did. But they weren't alone. They weren't trying to die, and the battle wasn't as simple as 300 guys against 1,000,000. History is always more complicated than the stories we tell about it. The truth is that Thermopylae was a real battle where real soldiers made hard choices and fought incredibly well against terrible odds. Some of them chose to stay and die when they could have escaped. That's worth remembering and respecting, but we should remember all of them, not just the ones with the best marketing team. The myth of Thermopylae has lasted for more than 2,000 years because it tells us something we want to believe. That courage matters, that a few people standing together can resist something much bigger and more powerful. That sacrifice for your home and your people means something. Those ideas aren't myths, they're real, but the details matter too. When we strip away the exaggerations and the propaganda, we find something better than the myth. We find actual human beings making choices, being scared probably, and doing it anyway. That's more inspiring than any superhero story about invincible warriors. Next time you see a movie or read a book about the 300 Spartans, you'll know the real story. You'll know about the thousands of other Greeks who fought there. You'll know about the betrayal that doomed them. You'll know that Leonidas stayed because of a prophecy, not just because Spartans never retreat. And you'll know that even in defeat, even when most of them died, they achieved what they were trying to do. They delayed the Persians long enough for Greece to survive. Hit subscribe if you want more history that actually tells you what really happened instead of just repeating the same old myths.